I think in the near term, de-dollarization is probably overstated. It's easier to say something like, it's easier for BRICS nations to say we're going to do something than to actually agree on it, build it, make it credible, and start using it at significant volumes. India and China and the BRICS nations in general become a larger percentage of global GDP than the G7 eventually. In the near term, I think some of these moves are, while they're happening, I think people might overstate the speed of them happening. So for example, de-dollarization is not really a big theme for my, say, 1 to 2 year Bitcoin outlook, but I think it does factor into, say, a 5+ year Bitcoin outlook.
According to recent data from Buy Bitcoin Worldwide, there are an estimated 106 million owners of Bitcoin in the world, 400,000 daily users, 200 million Bitcoin wallets, and 53 million Bitcoin traders. While an impressive feat for a relatively new asset class that is challenging the centuries-old setup of the global traditional financial industry, many more stable owners and users have to come aboard before the leading crypto asset can begin to reach its full potential. The first decade of Bitcoin adoption was championed by retail investors. The second decade started with institutions, but this phase of adoption, very much like the first, has had its share of challenges. The most recent is the regulatory crackdown on crypto and crypto-related firms in the United States. There have also been lots of speculations about Operation Choke Point 2.0, the concerted efforts by U.S. regulators to cut off the entirety of the cryptocurrency industry from being able to access banking services in the United States and even in other countries that are allies of the U.S. According to renowned financial analyst Lyn Alden, while the first poses no threat to Bitcoin, the second does. Alden believes that Choke Point, which is being carried out subtly, poses a temporary but serious threat to Bitcoin as it would further scare off institutional adoption. During a recent discussion with Kitco's Michelle McCory, the investment strategist also discussed the sovereign adoption of Bitcoin, which at the moment is happening simultaneously with institutional adoption. One factor that Alden believes would have a massive impact on sovereign adoption is de-dollarization, the ongoing efforts by certain countries, especially members of the BRICS alliance and their allies, to dethrone the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. While Alden does not believe the dethroning of the dollar will be immediate, she explains that the plans to achieve, at the least, a multipolar world are in full swing. We will now bring you clips from Alden's insightful discussion with Kitco News as the financial analyst discusses her views on regulation, de-dollarization, and the role of Bitcoin in an increasingly multipolar world. Please watch the video to the end, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you never miss out on any of our future videos. Also, be sure you drop your comments and observations in the comments section below so the video can reach more viewers. Thanks and enjoy the video.
I think there are kind of two different buckets here that are happening simultaneously, and they're somewhat overlapping, and sometimes the narrative gets confused between them. So on one hand, you have a lot of crypto things that are potentially violating securities laws, that they passed the Howey test, that they are essentially securities, but they haven't registered as such. And therefore, banks are less likely to want to bank entities that are potentially engaging in securities fraud. And you have the government kind of taking pretty aggressive actions behind the scenes to try to get those companies to have more banking frictions. So that one, I think, is probably going to be with us for a while. Bitcoin itself has a clear regulatory picture from a security standpoint. The chair of the SEC, the chair of the CTFC, like Commodities Futures Trading Commission, multiple different regulators have pointed out that Bitcoin's not a security.
Yeah,
it's a commodity.
Yeah.
It's very clear in that front. I think the threats to Bitcoin are not securities related, but they're more choke point related. So it's either trying to kick miners out of the country or trying to increase the frictions of getting money out of fiat currency into buying Bitcoin, similar to what we've seen in developing countries. It's kind of a funny thing where if you see a government move to restrict your access to Bitcoin, it's actually kind of an advertisement that you probably need Bitcoin.
Right.
Because if they weren't threatened by Bitcoin, there'd be much less reason to do that. You generally only see that in countries that are having pretty severe currency problems. But because the United States and European Union are large enough and responsible for a significant percentage of capital flows, that does pose a price risk with any sort of, let's say, 18-month or 3-year period for Bitcoin if they were to aggressively go after choke points. Basically say that, it's still legal to hold Bitcoin, but the banks can't send money to Bitcoin brokers, crypto exchanges, anything like that. It would kind of narrow the fire hose of, I think that's one of those things that would damage it for a number of years, because especially institutional capital would be much less willing or much less able to get into it. I think we'd have to ask what is happening at that time that causes them to make such a drastic action, right? So the United States is this environment that encourages, innovation. It encourages rule of law, open markets, no capital controls. And if you start to get those types of capital controls or those types of industry-specific crackdowns, you'd have to ask what's happening. Why are they so concerned about the dollar or so concerned about the rise of Bitcoin that they would take such extreme action? And I think it's kind of like Nigeria and Argentina, maybe less extreme, but in those environments, when they cut off Bitcoin, again, it's a really good sign that you probably want Bitcoin because something's not going right with the currency that would trigger such extreme action.
As Alden has explained, U.S. regulators have an ongoing and very obvious battle against pretty much the rest of the cryptocurrency industry, with the exception of Bitcoin. But they could also have a more subtly, yet just as potent battle against the leading cryptocurrency, which unfortunately, they continue to lump together with unregulated securities like the FTT token. But declaring an all-out war on Bitcoin and all of the cryptocurrency industry, instead of providing clear rules for the industry, will be a grave mistake on the part of policymakers in the United States. It will, of course, impact the industry for a while, maybe even more than China's mining ban, but it won't be the end of the industry or its continued growth and development. Let's get back to Alden's interview as she discusses her views on de-dollarization and how it would impact her short and long-term Bitcoin outlook.
I think in the near term, de-dollarization is probably overstated. It's easier to say something like, it's easier for BRICS nations to say we're going to do something than to actually agree on it, build it, make it credible, and start using it at significant volumes. So, we've seen kind of a period of de-dollarization. I think the long-term trend towards de-dollarization is clear. Basically, this kind of period is somewhat unnatural to begin with. If we have a country with 5% of the world population, but we're responsible for like 90% of international currency swaps, that's kind of a long-term unsustainable situation anyway. We've seen, for example, as India and China and the BRICS nations in general become a larger percentage of global GDP than the G7 eventually. That does result in an inherently more multipolar world, and that necessitates a multipolar currency world and a multipolar payments world so that one country can't just shut off payment systems of a country that's actually in some ways larger than itself. It wouldn't make sense. In the near term, I think some of these moves are, while they're happening, I think people might overstate the speed of them happening. So for example, de-dollarization is not really a big theme for my, say, 1 to 2 year Bitcoin outlook, but I think it does factor into, say, a 5+ year Bitcoin outlook. I think that kind of like how when you have de-dollarization, there's more interest in central banks in gold as an asset.
Record buying, yeah.
Exactly. I think so. Right now, Bitcoin is generally too small for most sovereigns. You have some smaller ones like Kingdom of Bhutan that's mining Bitcoin. They're able to kind of get into that space, but it's not large enough to be really a sovereign reserve asset. I think if you have another couple cycles of Bitcoin growth and you add to its market capitalization, to its liquidity, reduce its volatility, I think it could become a relevant sovereign reserve asset for some of these countries that want more independent, unsanctionable reserves that they can also use as unsanctionable payments. So I do think that Bitcoin is one of the solutions they can turn to, but right now it's, except for the smallest countries, it's still in many ways too small for these bigger sovereigns to fully take it seriously.
Do you see Bitcoin being owned by central banks in 10 years' time?
10 years' time, I do. I think it starts with the smaller ones, and it also starts with any of these small countries that not only maybe want to hold Bitcoin, but they want to signal to Bitcoin companies that they're a friendly jurisdiction. So whether it's El Salvador or Switzerland or Liechtenstein or Dubai or Singapore, whatever the case may be, these smaller countries can say, we're a neutral ground. We're conducive to working with you. If, for example, the United States makes it a pretty hostile place, then they can gather some of that business. So I think there will be probably havens. Those havens might grow in size, or kind of medium-sized havens might also want to enter that market. But I think as you get a decade in the future, I wouldn't be surprised to see larger sovereigns own Bitcoin.
Regardless of the threat to the United States and the dollar's dominance, when the dust settles, everyone will see the need for a censorship-resistant, mathematically secure, scarce asset built on an incorruptible network. The same cannot be said for the US dollar and investors who continue to depend on it and other rapidly declining fiat currencies. In a multipolar world, investors will turn towards sound and hard money like Bitcoin, the soundest and hardest of them all.
Today's episode is sponsored by iTrust.capital, the #1 crypto IRA platform in America. We allow you to invest in your favorite cryptocurrencies without worrying about taxes. That's right, iTrust.capital allows you to buy and sell your favorite cryptocurrencies completely tax-free. That means if you invest $10,000 into Cardano and it grows to $100,000, all of your profits are tax-free. Why is it tax-free? We took the existing retirement account industry and flipped it on its head. Instead of boring stocks and bonds, you can invest in crypto. How is it secured? Through Coinbase Custody, one of the leading cold storage providers with a $320 million insurance policy to protect against theft, hacks, and loss of funds. Roll over your existing retirement account, or even start a new one from scratch. Questions? Schedule a free call with one of our crypto retirement account specialists, and they can help you discuss your options. Start your crypto IRA today and retire early, only at iTrust.capital. Click the link in the description to open a free account now.
What are your thoughts on Lyn Alden's interview? Please drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.